So we're continuing with our exploration of the Heart Sutra, and a few weeks ago we began with the point um, that is somewhat paradoxical, and we're going to continue to explore paradox today. Um, and the where we began our exploration of these, these are the core teachings of the Great Way of Buddhism, Buddhism's Great Way, uh, is that experience is very vivid. I mean, you know what you're experiencing right now. You're looking at me giving this talk, but you're looking at a computer screen, or if you're watching this later on your cell phone, you're looking at it on some screen, or you're at least listening to it on something. Right? It's very vivid, and yet it's just an image that is constantly changing. It's not a solid, real, always going to be this way thing, or else I couldn't move my hand. If it was always one thing, it would never change, but it's changing, right? So it's very vivid and constantly changing in a very dynamic and open way. So we started our exploration of experience is vivid and yet not a thing, not a thing. Right? So then we went to the line of form is emptiness, and then last week emptiness also is form. And form is emptiness has to do with, the vivid experience that you're having shows up as things. I was using my cell phone to time the meditation practice that we were doing. Here's my cell phone. It feels like a thing. It's very vivid. I go, it's my cell phone. I don't say, well, here's the screen and the programs and the, components and the extra case that I have and the camera. I don't start talking about all the things that make it up. I have this illusion that it is one phenomena, but actually it's many things. And it's not the same thing that I bought. When I came home from the store and I had my cell phone, it had less information on it. It didn't have a history. It has changed, even though it looks like the same thing. So this shows up looking like one solid thing, and yet it's dynamic. Oh, the screen was going dark. I tap it, I bring it back on. Right? It's a very dynamic experience. That's the vividness of it. Right? So that's very useful to understand because we get into we get into problems and are treating things as if they were solid. This is the way it's always been, or even worse, this is what happened. It's a solid event that cannot be altered, and now we can argue about what happened. That creates a world of problems, forgetting that it was open and dynamic. So that was form is emptiness. The other half of it, emptiness also is form. Well, you might think there's some special emptiness somewhere, some special spiritual experience called emptiness or shunyata or enlightenment that is different than what's happening right now. As if somewhere out there in Narnia or Nirvana or heaven or somewhere, right? And then if you try hard enough, you can get to that special experience. And to say emptiness is no other than form is like, well, what's happening right now is the emptiness you're trying to get to. So I pick up the cell phone and it shows up as emptiness, vividly having this form, right? This is also emptiness. It's a form. It appears to be one thing. I'll turn it back on again, right? But it's also emptiness showing up. And where that's really helpful, and I'm trying not to be too philosophical or get lost in categories, but where it's really helpful is, well, you show up or I show up, right? I show up in my life as Brian. Well, this is how emptiness shows up in my life with all the vivid experiences that I'm having. So you show up as you, and that's also emptiness, remembering I am empty. This is the expression. This is how emptiness is expressing itself in my experience of cell phone or in how I feel right now, what emotions I'm having, what memories I'm having, what physical sensations I'm having. That's how it shows up. It doesn't show up in some other special emptiness that you've never touched before. It's already showing up. Form is no other than emptiness. Emptiness is no other than form. It's a paradox. And a lot of it depends, like a lot of paradoxes, on scale. So when I was thinking about this question of paradox earlier, because the Heart Sutra is inviting you to consider the paradox of human experience. And the paradox is essentially where we started, that experience is very vivid, but even though it's vivid, it's not a solid permanent thing, even though it feels that way. So here are a couple that are sort of, I think, easy to wrap your head around. Right? The sun comes up in the east, and then it steadily throughout the day progresses to the west. And even though it's going that way, it comes back in from the east. Well, how can something that went west come back from the east? If you didn't know, for the last 500 years or so, the certainty of the world being a globe and, the whole thing, that would be a strong paradox. It only doesn't seem like a paradox because you can take a step back and have a much bigger view and go, well, it felt like it rose from the east because we're actually rotating. Right? And we're in a solar system in which the Earth's going around the sun, and the whole thing, right? But you have to have the bigger view to resolve the paradox satisfactorily. Because if you argue, is it east or is it west, you'll be stuck in an unsolvable problem. And then you'll develop a theology or a psychology or politics about east versus west. So the bigger view is very helpful. Right? Here's another one. I once heard somebody talking about, they had made it their life's ambition. This was on a podcast I was listening to. They could see a rainbow, and I think they were somewhere on the American plains or the Canadian prairies, or you see the whole arc of the rainbow, and they're in town X and they can see all the way over there by town Y. That's where the rainbow comes down. And so they get in their car and they drive as fast as they can, trying to get to where the rainbow comes down because they can see it. Interestingly, the rainbow kept moving. Like the closer they got to Y, it went away. And when they eventually got there, it wasn't there. They could see it, but it wasn't a thing. And there was a long story about how this person eventually realized it all depended on the perspective. The rainbow is an event. It's very vivid, beautiful, compelling. I hope you've all seen one, right? And I've seen them arc, right? And it's like heartbreakingly beautiful, and yet it's not a solid thing. It depends on the position of the sun and the amount of water and your angle looking at it. And if you change the angle, it can either go away or move. But if it was a solid thing, it couldn't. And so you have to have the perspective, the bigger perspective of experience to get that it's not one thing. You all in your examples, I thought they were wonderful to find a balance by going to the extremes. Like going to the extremes gives you the perspective, right? So in answer to the question of what's a paradox that you've experienced, right? Um, finding that you're being mindful even while you lose your mindfulness and you're dropping things, right? But then there's part of you that can be mindful. That's a lot like meditation practice. You're being mindful of the breath, and then your attention wanders. So by definition, you're not being mindful. But the only way you catch that is by being mindful and coming back. And so there's a paradox happening, right? Or two people had the example of taking care of somebody, and the balance, the very tender, careful balance between care and too much care, between care and letting the person be who they need to be. Um, Here was another one, and there were two versions of this, and I love the one summary phrase. But we are at this time where the environment is we are really challenged by environmental changes, and yet some of them are pleasant. And so the short sentiment of, how was it? And it's hard not to enjoy the end of the world when the weather is so beautiful. That's paradoxical because you have a sense of disaster and delight at the same time. Or the person loving you most deeply is also the person who hurts you. And that's true often. So there's a concept that all of this is leading up to that I wanted to introduce, which is called the two truths. And they will appear to be paradoxical. They are two truths that seem to contradict each other like a paradox, and yet they are both true at the same time. And it's part of what the Heart Sutra is trying to express. What is often in Buddhism called the absolute or ultimate truth is the radical openness of every phenomena, shunyata. We've been calling it open, empty, full. Sometimes it's just translated as emptiness, right? But that radically open, empty, full quality of everything that happens, that's what phenomena means, things that happen, happening things, right? Experiences of happening, right? So everything that you experience, everything, your memories, your thoughts, your beliefs, your body sensations, the world around you, your sense of individuality, all of it, open, empty, full. That's the ultimate or final truth. And yet, there is also something called the relative truth. I may be, this experience might be radically open, empty, and full, but I call it Brian. It has a name, it has a history, there's content. That's how it showed up, right? That's what it's all dressed up in, right? It's not some other special open, empty, full that's coming in to be, to interrupt this. This is how it shows up. And so knowing that this phenomena that you're experiencing, so whoever you are, your name, your history, the room that you're watching this in, the device that you're watching it on, all of your feelings and emotions and your plans for the rest of the day, that's how emptiness is showing up. It's showing up in a form you can relate to. It's relative. And yet it's also not a thing. And those two truths are not having a fight with each other. They are paradoxical. One is the big, wide perspective, and the other is the immediate, what's happening right now perspective. And when you're looking at your life, sometimes it's useful to have that wide open perspective. And then often it's very useful on a relative level. And this is where a lot of compassion comes in. It's like, well, maybe I'm having a painful memory of really being hurt. And I can let myself feel that because that will open my heart and touch me and allow me to work with who I am and what this experience is, at the same time that I'm remembering that this is how emptiness shows up. So the fact that they can speak to each other, that they are actually like heads and tails of the same coin, or if you will, yin and yang of the same coin, right? That's very useful. We have a tendency in our culture to just want one truth. The truth. What is it? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you, whatever your higher power is? As if there was just one truth. But there are many truths. If you've ever been in a fight with somebody and you're arguing over who said what to who, and the two of you are the who in that question, you will have experience. Well, I said this and I meant X, but you heard X and thought Y, and actually you heard X and thought I said Z. And then you go back and you're trying to figure it all out and you spend a lot of time often getting angrier, and it's sort of like, let's take a breath and relax and then see if we can re-engage, right? But we don't do that. We get dug into the fight, right? So it's very helpful to have this sense of there are two levels of truth, two, I love that, like the two extremes of the absolutely relative and the truly absolute, and you find the balance in between. And the Heart Sutra is pointing at that. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is also form. Form is no other than emptiness. Emptiness is no other than form. That they are talking to each other in a way that is meant to expand your awareness out of thinking that you're a solid thing and your experience is a solid thing and there is some rock-like thinginess that you can hold on to. It's much more like a river with its dynamic movement than like a rock. So there's a lot more to say about this, and we're going to go further with, in the same way, feeling, formation, and consciousness. We'll pick up there next week. But today I just wanted to explore the idea of paradox, and that there are what appear to be contradictory. The big view of every phenomena is open, empty, full, and the small view or the relative view of, and this one feels really compelling, and how the two of those talk to each other. So with that, I'm going to end the recording and I look forward to hearing what you think. I have to lean to the side and find the stop recording button. Oh, here it is.